on GB News. My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30. The camera is just swinging around there, and my name's Tom Harwood. This is The Briefing on GB News. Today, we're going to be exploring the Tory leadership contest, of course. Those ballots land on members' doormats from this morning. Is the leadership race already sewn up? Also, the House of Lords. Can it take any more peers? That and strikes and football and some news from Northern Ireland, all to come after the headlines.
Well, a very good morning. It is 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Queen has hailed the Lionesses' historic Euro 2022 win as an inspiration for girls and women across the nation. It's England's first major championship win since the 1966 World Cup. England beat Germany 2-1 in extra time in front of a record crowd of over 87,000 fans at Wembley Stadium. Ukraine's infrastructure minister says a ship carrying grain has left the port of Odessa. It's the first part of a deal to unblock Ukraine's Black Sea ports. In the battle to replace Boris Johnson, both leadership candidates have made further policy announcements in a bid to shore up support from Tory members. Liz Truss has vowed to remove EU regulations and red tape in an effort to improve the nation's food security. Foreign Secretary has also promised to tackle staff shortages in farming, partly caused by post-Brexit restrictions, with a short-term expansion to seasonal workers scheme. Well, meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has committed to taking 4 pence off income tax within 7 years if he becomes Prime Minister. The former Chancellor said cutting the basic rate from 20p in the pound to 16 pence would amount to a 20% tax reduction, the largest cut to income tax, he says, in 30 years. There's going to be a virtual Court of Appeal hearing that's going to take place at 11 o'clock today to hear Archie Battersby's life support treatment case. The government referred the case back to the courts for urgent consideration following an intervention by the UN. 12-year-old Archie is in a coma after suffering brain damage. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now, back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, the Tory leadership contest rages on with another frantic few days of policy announcements, debates and hustings as ballot papers, of course, begin to drop on those doormats of almost 200,000 Conservative Party members from today. The former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has launched a policy offensive, promising big tax cuts, albeit not for years to come, as high-profile colleagues continue to endorse Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. Sunak has pledged to cut the basic rate of income tax from 20p in the pound to 16p by the end of the next Parliament. Allies of Liz Truss have responded by saying tax cuts are needed now, not in 7 years' time. Meanwhile, Liz Truss continues to gain momentum with a new endorsement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi. She, of course, has promised school and farming reforms as well over the weekend. Well, let's talk about the state of the race now. It's a pleasure to be joined by Dr. Richard Johnson, politics lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. And I suppose the first big question in this race is Is it already all sewn up? We've seen a flurry of cabinet endorsements for Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak continues to struggle to gain momentum.
Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be an uphill battle for Rishi Sunak. If you looked at the polling at the start among Conservative members, Liz Truss already began with about half of Conservative members. Now, she could have done very badly in the debates. There could have been some kind of scandal, who knows, that could have damaged her. But actually, she's done fairly well in the debates. Her campaign has done quite well. And so she was ahead. She's maintained and grown that lead. I think now what we see from Sunak is, it looks pretty desperate, actually, what he's trying to do.
It's interesting. We haven't seen an opinion poll of Conservative Party members for quite some time, a week now since the last opinion poll of Conservative Party members have come out. Are we all relying too much on old data here? Could it have been the case that Rishi Sunak's new announcements, his, what some might say, are U-turns on VAT and on income tax, might have turned things around?
It's possible, but I think that Liz Truss, it was for Liz Truss to lose, and I don't think she's really done anything in particular that would make me feel that people have abandoned her. If there was a huge pool of undecided voters and she had been below 50% at the start of this contest, then I might have said, who knows? Who knows where the undecideds break? But she would actually have to actively lose people who are already supporting her, and I don't think that she has.
Interesting. Well, let's bring in now political commentator Benedict Spence, who can join us down the line. Here he is. Brilliant. And Benedict, I just wanted to get your reaction to Nadeem Zwahi's endorsement last night of Liz Truss. Writing in The Telegraph, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the current Chancellor, that is Nadeem Zwahi, talks about boosters and doomsters, implying perhaps that Liz Truss is someone who has a boosterish attitude and maybe Rishi Sunak is a bit of a doomster.
Yes, I mean, it's sort of think tank language, isn't it? It's looking at things in quite sort of black and white. And I mean, it's something that's plagued the Tory party for years, is this sort of this perspective that it might be a little bit too declinist. I did think actually it was rather curious that Mr. Zahawi said that Liz Truss will overturn stale economic orthodoxy and run the economy along conservative principles, which I thought was a bit of an odd line to take, all things considered. But realistically, I think that that's the key thing, is that Liz Truss is offering the closest thing actually to what Boris Johnson offered, which is possibilities. You know, Liz Truss isn't sitting there and saying, we can't do this, we can't do that. And that's very much what Sunak is saying. Liz Truss is, talking about, before today at the very least, she was the one that was talking about the largest tax cut. She was talking about things that I think people want to hear, a little bit more optimism. On the one hand, I think that is sensible of your Liz Truss, because you need a way to sort of appeal to people, that sort of constituency that Boris Johnson was able to get at the last general election, which includes sort of Labour voters, and they want sort of big ticket items that they can really get behind. Same with Brexit. That was, again, it was about voting for possibilities, not for the status quo. The only thing I think that might cause a little bit of caution, or should sound a little bit of caution, is the fact that I think Rishi Sunak is being a little bit doomster, if we were going to be a little bit unfair, partly because the British economy is in the state that it is for reasons that are slightly beyond the short-term control of government. So I don't think that this malaise that we find ourselves in is necessarily something that can be solved with overnight tax cuts. I mean, that might give a little bit of respite to people, a little bit of a reprieve in their pockets. But I don't think that this is simply a case of saying, what we need is lower taxes, don't put up corporation tax. What we need is entirely, sort of go along the sort of the free market think tank route. Ultimately, what the country needs is reinforcement in key areas, key industries, things like house building, things like power, and these things actually will require, I would have thought, quite a lot of government intervention, quite a lot of government spending. And I think that that's possibly, if you're Rishi Sunak, you're sat there going, yes, I'd quite like to be able to slash taxes, but right now, when things are, we are at the mercy of global waves, it's not necessarily the moment to do it.
Of course, what some of those free marketeers might say is actually what's getting in the way of house building is too much government regulation rather than not enough government involvement. But Richard Johnson, let's pick up on this point about whether or not Liz Truss is Borisian in tone or indeed in policy, because boosterism does seem to be very Boris-like. However, Liz Truss has made this whole campaign about breaking with the economic orthodoxy of the last 20 years, including, of course, the last 3 years under Boris Johnson?
If you look at the reason why this leadership contest came about, it wasn't really about a rejection of policies from the government, possibly a sense of a lack of direction or a lack of policies, but not really people rebelling against a particular policy and say there was this pushback against Thatcher for her Euroscepticism in 1990. In many ways, the issue really came down to the person of the Prime Minister, and I think Rishi Sunak thought that would be enough to present himself as, he's kind of the man of integrity. Tough claim when he was also fined in the Partygate story. I think, Liz Truss is trying to present herself as someone who's pro-economic stimulus, but also she's pulling on the heartstrings of the Conservatives with some of her kind of symbolic throwbacks to Thatcher and the way that she's been, trying to make comparisons with her, not so subtly in this contest. So she knows, I think, where the heart and soul of the current Conservative Party is.
It's interesting, that point. Let's pick this up with Benedict Spence, because to some extent the received wisdom was that this toppling of Boris Johnson came about because of the way that he acted personally, because of personal failings, perhaps even moral failings in Number 10. Although, looking at the way that this race has developed, to some extent, perhaps it is more about policy than we had all thought. Perhaps if the economy had been going gangbusters, if Conservatives were placated with not the highest tax burden in 70 years, with perhaps tax cuts and deregulation, and actually using that enormous majority to do Conservative things, perhaps Boris Johnson would have got away more with some personal failings.
It's a curious one, because I think an awful lot of what enabled Boris Johnson to hang on for quite as long as he did was the fact that it was Boris Johnson, and he'd spent 20 years cultivating this sort of impregnable image that I know a lot of people in London didn't quite understand, but actually a lot of people in the broader country quite did. Also, I think a lot of people, certainly in the former Labour constituencies, were not opposed necessarily to greater state intervention, especially during the pandemic. But I think, Liz Truss is sort of swinging for the fence here. She's going gangbusters, I suppose, for the membership, and hoping that in 2 years, the state of the economy will improve with her interventions, with her policies, enough to win over the rest of the country. Because my big fear, I think, for Liz Truss right now is that she is, I said that she was a big ticket, sort of big policy kind of person like Boris Johnson. But as you say, she is slightly the inverse of Boris Johnson in that she wants to reduce the size of the state. She needs to win over those people in that so-called fabled red wall, that this is actually the way forward. If she manages to do that, then it'll have been a magnificent gamble. But I think that's where you're right, Rishi Sunak's belief that carrying on sort of business as usual, what Boris Johnson was offering, would be enough. It's clearly not enough with the Tory members. And that's what you need to win over right now. That's why Rishi Sunak has come out with the policy today about reducing the rate of income tax to 16%. Fantastic with the Tory members. I'm sure it would be very good with the country, but you need to get to the country first. And up until now, Rishi Sunak has, I think, been playing more to the general public than the party. And I think that has really hindered him, frankly, and I think it is partly what's going to see him lose this race.
Well, it'll be fascinating, of course. Members start voting as soon as today, those ballot papers dropping through letterboxes from the 1st of August, of course. Benedict Spence, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Really appreciate your analysis there. Well, now turning to something else that Boris Johnson may be getting up to in his final month or so as Prime Minister. It's tradition for departing PMs to create new life peerages as in a resignation honours list. Now, reports from the Times newspaper suggest that Boris Johnson could appoint dozens of new peers to the second largest chamber in the world. That, of course, second only in size to the People's Republic of China Legislative Assembly, of course. Now, I've still got Dr. Richard Johnson with me here in the studio, and you have some interesting thoughts about the size of the House of Lords. The House of Lords is an enormous chamber, but potentially it behaves differently to other chambers around the world. And could you talk to that, how potentially the size of the Lords might not be this big issue that we should all get so hung up about?
I'm going to say something controversial. It's GBNews. Why not? I think the House of Lords could be a lot bigger. It used to be over 1,300 members in the 1990s. Tony Blair took out about 600, mostly Conservative, hereditary peers in his reform. He then appointed over 370 more, mostly Labour peers to the House of Lords. So there's been a lot of reshaping of the House of Lords. The House of Lords, as you said, isn't like other legislative chambers. We shouldn't see it like other legislative chambers. We should see it more as a pool of a mix of experts and experienced politicians who can intervene on particular debates on areas that they have something important, interesting, or relevant to say. But we shouldn't expect peers to behave like MPs. You know, in terms of daily attendance, there are fewer Lords who go and participate than MPs. So functionally, the House of Lords is actually smaller than the Commons in terms of who's there on a given day, and that's fine. We sometimes you might want Lord Robert Winston to come in and speak about some matter of embryology, or the late Lord Trimble, a Nobel Prize winner. We don't necessarily need him to speak on every matter, but when it comes to something to do with Northern Ireland in particular, we might want someone of his calibre there in the wings ready to come in. And that's what I think is, you know, missing from this discussion. We don't want a replicate House of Commons.
You don't want everyone to cram in all the time and vote on every issue. Although, looking at the numbers there, the Conservative Party, of course, does not have a majority, nothing close to it in the House of Lords. Let's have a look at some of these appointments since 1997. We have the numbers for everyone here. Blair appointed 374 peers. Gordon Brown appointed 34. Cameron appointed 245, of course, a lot of those being Liberal Democrats when the coalition came in as well. May appointed 43. And up until the 31st of January 2020, Boris Johnson appointed 21. So that's 717 new peers since 1997, a pretty large number. But what is the likelihood that Boris Johnson will institute a sort of Blair-style injection to almost rebalance the Lords, which has a Labour, Lib Dem supermajority as things stand? Can Boris get away with injecting a lot of new Conservative peers to help win those votes in the Lords?
Yeah, I think we don't want to see the Lords in terms of trying to get as close to each election, you know, in terms of its composition, because that is a way in which there is an expansion that probably would just keep going on and on. But Prime Ministers, I think, are entitled to ensure that certain voices are heard in the Lords. And, you know, if the Prime Minister feels that some voices aren't being heard at the moment but have some interesting contributions to make, then the Prime Minister should feel entitled to do that. You know, there's always been a bit of a scandal with resignation honours. The most probably infamous was Harold Wilson with his lavender list when he resigned, and he put his personal doctor in the House of Lords, for example, and he gave an honour to his housekeeper. You know, so this is something that goes way back. It's not the most kind of beautiful element of the British system, but I think that the flexibility that Prime Ministers have is a price worth paying to ensure that actually the House of Lords has something different and interesting to say, but can't challenge the primacy of the House of Commons, which I think is an extremely important democratic principle. There's a paradox here that the kind of undemocratic composition of the House of Lords preserves the democratic principle of the primacy of the House of Commons. And I think that that's something that also gets missed in this discussion. If you make the House of Lords more professionalised, more regularised, then it will start to claim some kind of legitimacy contra the House of Commons. And rather than seeing the House of Lords eventually give way to the will of the House of Commons, the House of Lords might become more insistent in blocking the House of Commons.
And this is the Tony Benn argument, why he never was in favour of Lords reform. He was in favour of Lords abolition, because he didn't want that challenge to the democratic mandate. Dr. Richard Johnson, it has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for being here in the studio with us to talk through those very important issues. No doubt we'll be hearing more about the Lords and all the rigmarole around that as time goes on. Well, now to our next story today. Thousands of BT and Openreach workers will go on strike again on Monday in a dispute over pay. This is in addition to the rail strikes planned for the coming weeks, causing some to dub this summer the summer of discontent. Well, let's digest this now with Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of The Sun, of course. And Kelvin, I suppose the first question is, will people feel like this is a summer of discontent? Yes, these strikes might get a bit annoying, but given that we've all been relatively used to a lot of disruption over the last couple of years, working from home and all the rest of it, does it really have the potential to match 1979?
That is a very good point. I'm glad you raised that, because the truth about the matter is that COVID, the deaths, and the fact that we all worked in a different manner in the last couple of years has meant that nobody can kill us in the way that, for instance, it could happen in the 70s. You take around my way, there's a 3-week strike starting literally today to clear the rubbish. Well, people will be working out fresh ways of either going to relatives or going to the dump themselves. And if you take the trains, the truth about the matter is that the southeast, where I live, is a massive commuter area. So on that basis, all that's happening is that instead of going to work 3 days a week and working to a home, they're switching it round the other way and not going by trains, and endangering the very job security of the people who are going on strike, who are going to lose their jobs anyway. By the way, the world is changing. We're not going by train as much, and the southeast was a unique European, right? Nowhere in the world has that kind of commuter effect that the southeast has had. So southwestern trains will be in bigger trouble financially than they are right now. So it is true that we can't be killed anymore. However, is it right that people can simply decide when they have important jobs to do? For instance, what's going to happen if it's true that the NHS is going to be hit by industrial disputes by either A, nurses, B, doctors, C, both? Is that an appropriate reaction in a commercial dispute over money? So patients are made sicker because of this kind of thing. I think there has to be a law which says that if you do a job which you bring life and death to your job, along with your job, you cannot have the same powers that you have, for instance, with Openreach. So BT go on strike. Oh yes? Who cares whether they go on strike? There are other Wi-Fi providers. And all right, it causes you a bit of a problem for a while, but actually you should move on to somebody who isn't on strike. So that's my point about it. We can't be killed anymore, but if you're in a job where you bring life and death or tremendous aggravation to some area, then that cannot be simply allowed and said, jolly good, carry on, do your worst.
I wonder what the issue is here, with all of these strikes happening in the middle of a Tory leadership contest. Perhaps this might be a bit of a backfiring moment for these unions, choosing now to raise the issue of strikes to heighten the political salience of this matter at a time when two people are competing to be seen as the most Thatcherite, the most conservative, to win over Conservative Party members. Perhaps we're about to see some pretty profound reform to how these strikes could go ahead.
Well, personally, I'd like to see reform, and I'm sure that Truss has indicated that she wants to raise the bar on the percentages and various other ideas to stop disputes. I do notice that Rishi, by and large, has kept out of this issue. I'm not sure why. The trade union movement has been in massive decline this last 20, 25 years and will continue to go into decline. The only people that really are in the trade union movement anymore are state employees. And I don't think people feel very well disposed towards them. So if I were Rishi, I'd be pouring the most tremendous bucket over the trade union movement right now. And it may be one of the reasons that he is intellectually above the fray, and that's the reason he's not doing so well. I don't know, but the truth about the matter is we are in the silly season right now. We're in August. In August, there won't be a lot of coverage of the industrial conflagration that we could get together. We could get a whole series of these general secretaries all decide to come together. I tell you what we'll do. We will have a general strike. By the way, that would be an absolute disaster. We have more important things to worry about than the money-grabbing members of left-wing members of trade union movements. We have prices to worry about. We have energy to worry about. We have Ukraine to worry about. We have global security to worry about. So that would be a great mistake. But if it is going to happen, it's not going to happen in August. Nothing happens in August.
Well, Kelvin McKenzie, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing, and let's hope that that prediction of a general strike does not go ahead. Well, just finally today, the Prime Minister, Irish President and Taoiseach, as well as political leaders from Northern Ireland, are expected to attend the funeral of the late Lord David Trimble in Lisbon later this afternoon. Let's cross to our Northern Ireland correspondent, Doogie Beattie, who has the very latest.
Well, good morning and welcome to the small village of Lambeg, just outside the city of Lisburn. Anybody ex-servicemen that are watching will know exactly where this is. Thethel Barracks, the operations centre of the British Army in Northern Ireland, is just about a mile away. David Trimble represented the people of this area for many years. In fact, his family are still involved in local politics here. He will be buried here at about 12:30. It is expected that most of the Irish political circles will turn up here. He was a well-respected man, but he had a lot to give and a lot to lose as a leader. He did deliver us 25 years of peace in Northern Ireland along with John Hume. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for it, but unfortunately he couldn't bring the right wing of his party with him, and it cost him electorally. And that put in place the Sinn Féin and the DUP, one of them that didn't necessarily agree with the Good Friday Agreement and the other party that saw it as a stepping stone to a united Ireland. So his legacy very much a mixed one, but it will be remembered for the peace of 25 years here in Northern Ireland.
That, of course, an absolute titan of not just Northern Ireland politics, but actually world peace as well. That Nobel Peace Prize will, of course, be an accolade that he's held for a long, long time. Thanks, Doogie, for bringing us all of that. Well, that's it for the programme today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Alex Phillips and Mercy Maroki. But for now, I'll leave you with the weather forecast.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking dry and sunny for most, but rain arriving in the west later. Let's take a look at the details. So it will be a dry and bright start across the southwest of England with some early sunny spells, but cloud may linger over higher ground and soon feeling warm in the sunshine. London and the southeast will have a rather cloudy start to the day on Monday, with the odd shower likely, possibly heavy in places. It's a dry and mostly sunny start across South Wales with a little more cloud towards the west, quickly feeling warm in the sunshine. Monday morning will start dry and sunny across the Midlands with almost clear blue skies for all areas. And after a mild night, temperatures will soon rise through the morning in the August sunshine. There'll be a mix of sunny spells and broken cloud across northeast England. An isolated, mostly light shower is possible, but most places will remain dry, feeling pleasantly warm in the sunshine. Then it will be a dry start across Scotland with plenty of sunny spells from the start, the odd shower possible in the east, but most places will stay dry. And Northern Ireland will start Monday dry and sunny, soon feeling warm in the sunshine, but cloud will slowly build from the west through the morning before rain arrives in the afternoon. Staying dry with sunny spells in the south and east, but rain arriving in the north and west. And that's how your weather's shaping up for the rest of your Monday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On